Okay, so let's start. So this will we'll try and finish this much today. Okay, so can you guys quickly tell me what the chemical formula for each of those things mentioned there is? What is lime? Anyone?
CaCO3.
Slate lime. I'm looking for slate lime.
CaOS twice.
That's actually hydrated lime. Okay, slate lime is CaO, just calcium oxide. Okay, what about 1 second? I'll try and present the tab instead of presenting the entire screen. That way I can keep a tab on the attendance as well. Can you guys still see the screen?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what about silica?
SiO2.
Okay.
SiO2.
Alumina?
Al2O3.
Correct. Iron oxide?
Fe2O3.
Correct. Ideally, you should have asked me, so the two oxides of iron, which one are you asking for? Okay, there's both ferrous and ferric. So cement sort of contains both in certain proportions. And then there is gypsum already. And I told you why we add gypsum into the cement paste. You guys remember the reason that I gave in the last class?
To fix the cement lately.
Correct.
Delay the
So
setting.
let's call it to delay the setting time. Okay. So predominantly your cement is made up of two kinds of materials or two kinds of rocks as raw materials. They're called calcareous and argillaceous rocks. Okay. When we say calcareous, they're basically rocks that supply lime into concrete. I mean your cement. And your argillaceous rocks are rocks that contribute to the alumina and your silica content. Okay. So cements can, very broadly be classified into natural, pozzolana, slag, and Portland. Portland is the thing that is, predominantly used in the industry today. I told you we call it OPC, ordinary Portland cement. Okay. So the reason it was called Portland cement, I asked you guys to find out the reason. So when Joseph Aspidine sort of invented this, the color that resembled, or the color of the final product that was made, sort of resembled the color of a rock that was there near Portland, England. So he sort of called it Portland cement and the name stuck. Okay. So natural cement, like we discussed in the last class, before, this cement as we know was invented, maybe our ancestors and most of our ancestral homes in our, rural areas would use just lime, okay, or sunna what we call in our local terms. Okay. So those are also, cementitious products, but they're not technically the comparable to modern day cement. I'll tell you why in a little while. Okay. So cement is any material which when mixed with water will sort of form a paste in its, plastic state, and it will become hard and give strength once it is after a certain time has passed, after it is hardened. Okay. So since the sort of rock that is used to manufacture this cement varies from place to place, the chemical composition might also vary. Okay. In fact, let's take one common example. You guys have heard of Birla cement. Okay. So Birla has various, sub brands called Birla Super, Birla White, and all of that. So if I had to compare Birla Super and Birla White, they are exactly identical in terms of chemical composition. Okay. Or at least exactly identical in terms of the purpose they serve. The only difference is the color of the cement. Your Birla Super is your cement gray in color, and your Birla White happens to be white in color. So why is this Birla white in color? Is because the raw materials or the calcareous and argillaceous rocks that is used to manufacture the cement is sourced from a particular area in Rajasthan where both the rocks happen to be white in color. Okay. Since the raw materials are white in color, the end product also happens to be white in color. Otherwise, chemically, they still have the same composition that we just, read. You still have lime, you still have silica, you still have alumina. Okay. So this sort of depends on your what raw materials used. Next, like we discussed, cement is mainly used as a binder. Okay. Cement is never used by itself. Have you guys, can you guys mute yourselves? I think someone is unmuted. Just check. So have you guys ever thought why should cement be mixed with sand and your coarse aggregates and fine aggregates and made concrete? Why can't we use cement by itself to make buildings? Has anyone thought? Does anyone have a reason why you think we mix it with those materials and not use just cement? Anyone?
Maybe because it's very powder, very loose, it doesn't have strength in it.
Okay. What else? Does anyone know how much one bag of cement costs?
Average 300 rupees, sir.
Okay, correct. So if you start off with the cheapest brand, the local ones
400.
like Ramco and all that, you probably get it around 350. But if you want superior quality ones like Ultratech, it might go up to 400, 450. Okay. In comparison, do you guys know how much 1 kg of fine aggregate or 1 kg of coarse aggregate costs? Anyone? It costs just 1 rupee. Okay. So let's say your fine aggregate and coarse aggregate costs 1 rupee. And in a bag of cement, how many kgs of cement is there?
50 kg.
Correct.
25.
Uh, 50, but you also might probably get bags of 25. Now think of this. Compare the cost of cement with cost of aggregates. So if I used only cement, I have a lot of drawbacks. One, like someone said, it is too fine. When it is too fine, what happens? You require more water. The effective total surface area of just cement particles is more. So it requires more water is one. And there's something called as heat of hydration that is released, due to which you might observe cracks. Okay. So to avoid that, and we don't really need very high strength material, we sort of mix it with your aggregates. Okay. In addition to that, cost. Cost is a predominant concern that we have. So that is why we mix it with aggregates. And this mixture of your cement with fine aggregate with coarse aggregate, that is called concrete, is used for all construction purposes. But if you remove coarse aggregates out of the equation, you have cement plus sand, which is called mortar. Okay. So this mortar, can you guys tell me where mortar is used?
So joining bricks.
Correct. It is used as a layer between layers of bricks. Okay. Where else? Where else in construction do we use mortar? Just cement plus sand, nothing else. Anyone?
Plastering.
Correct. Plastering. What is
Sir,
plastering? So basically, once you build a wall out of bricks or whatever, this exposed surface is very rugged, correct? So if you look around, all the walls around you have a very smooth surface. So to cover this, very rough, uneven surface of bricks or blocks that is there, we do something called as plastering. So this plastering is done using mortar. So mortar is basically just cement and sand mixed in a certain water cement ratio to give a paste, and this paste is applied to make the surface even. Okay. There are other applications of mortar as well. We'll come to that. So for now, the two main reasons is to build masonry. Masonry is what? Masonry is basically your walls and anything where there is no beams and columns. It's just bricks, blocks, and a layer of mortar in between. Okay. So quickly to list the differences between traditional cement or just the word cement and the most widely accepted commercial product today, that is Portland cement. A cement is any binder, okay, which when mixed with water sets. Okay. So this is can be used with your sand, whatever, to make mortar, plus your coarse aggregate to make concrete, and that is used everywhere. Okay. Whereas Portland, there is a little bit of there's a lot of chemistry that is going on. Okay. You need to have those specific set of materials mixed in a specific proportion, okay, burnt in a kiln at a particular temperature to form these clinkers, and these clinkers are ground to give powder, okay, of a certain fineness or certain particle size, and this when mixed with water should hydrate and give certain hydration products that we'll talk of in a while. Okay. So the chemical composition of this term on left, cement, is very vague. It can be anything. Okay, anything which when mixed with water sets. Whereas with Portland, you have those four necessary components that exist. Okay, so that is the predominant difference. So is Portland cement a type of cement? Yes, because it serves the same purpose. Meaning when you mix it with water, it does become a paste and eventually harden and give you strength. Next. So the other way of describing the composition of a cement is using this table. Okay, so this table on the right, if you see, I have highlighted four terms separately and put it inside a box. So if you notice those four terms, they're called C3S, C2S, C3A, and C4AF. So before this class, if I asked you what C3S stands for, you will tell, sir, C is carbon, S is sulfur. So C3S should probably be, I don't know, tricarbon sulfur or something like that. So it is not. So us civil engineers are very lazy people in terms of nomenclature or naming things. So C3X actually stands for something called as tricalcium silicate. So it's basically 3 parts calcium oxide and 1 part oxide of silica. Similarly, you have dicalcium silicate, which is CaO twice and then SiO2. You have tricalcium aluminate, which is CaO thrice plus your alumina. And then you have something called as tetracalcium aluminoferrate. Okay, the chemical formula is there. And if you take, say, 100% of cement, this will be the percentage-wise, distribution of these four compounds in your cement. Okay, and these four compounds together are grouped and called something called as Bogue's compounds. Remember this: BOGUE''S. This is the only spelling. Okay, when we ask this question in the quiz, I see all sort of spellings. Sometimes there's BOUGUES, BOUGES. Okay, just make a mental note of this. It's BOGUE''S compounds. So next time, if I ask you what C3A is, okay, it's not tricarbon. What is A? I don't know what A is. So it's tricalcium aluminate. Okay, so you don't look at the letters individually as a chemical element. This is just a shortened form of all those terms on the right. And the last column is basically the approximate percentages of each of these Bogue's compounds in cement. So how we arrive at these four components using calcareous and argillaceous slugs, we'll look at it in a little while. Okay, for now, in terms of chemical composition, what is cement composed of? Lime, silica, alumina, and a little bit of iron oxide. If they ask you more specifically, list the Bogue's compounds present in cement with their approximate percentages. You'll have to write this. Okay, next. Again, talking about chemical composition. So calcareous materials basically provide all the lime that is required for your cement. Your lime, like I said, is a calcium oxide. Okay, so this calcium oxide is, if you look at the proportion wise, it was the highest also. Okay, so the tricky thing about this calcium oxide is, if it is more than what is required in the cement, it reduces the strength. Okay, because it is expansive in nature, what will happen is it will expand, it will lead to cracks, it will make the concrete to disintegrate and fall. Okay, so it should not be more than desired. At the same time, it should also not be less than desired. Okay, so what happens if it's less than desired is it will lead to another type of problem. It leads to quick setting, and we don't want that. Okay, so two things: what? More of lime is bad because it leads to expansion, cracks, and then eventual disintegration. Less of lime is also bad because it reduces strength by quickly setting. Next, talk about argillaceous materials. You have your alumina and silica. This basically imparts strength, and it sort of complements the setting time, or it maintains the setting time caused due to calcareous materials. It does not extend it or shorten it. It maintains that optimum time that is provided for you to handle the concrete before it starts hardening. Okay, and then excess of alumina, again, what happens is it leads to expansion and something called as leaching, and which we don't want, which leads to weakened concrete strength. So excess of alumina is also bad. Next, during the manufacture of cement, we add one more thing, which is burnt or powdered coal. I mean unburnt or powdered coal. And this is just to, start this burning process to increase the temperature rapidly so that this fusion reaction can take place. And the last thing is gypsum, which I told you, which is added to reduce the, setting time of cement. Okay. So to start off with the manufacture of cement in itself. So broadly, it can be classified into dry process and wet process. Okay. In this dry process and wet process as well, three of the steps will remain the same. Okay. Your burning, grinding, storage, and packing, the procedure is exactly the same. It is only that before we reach the process of burning and grinding, how we deal with the materials is slightly different based on the nature of raw material that we have. Okay. So the raw materials, that is your calcareous and argillaceous rocks that you have, it can be very hard or it can be soft, because clay rocks can, tend to be soft. When you apply force on it, they might be, how do I tell it? It's not crystalline in nature, but it is not exactly amorphous as well. It will deform easily. Okay. So when you have such materials, you cannot really, which is not very hard, you cannot grind it effectively using the dry process. So in such case, what do? We mix such clay and other materials with water. We form it into a slurry. Okay. And then we grind it. So to draw an analogy, think of what we do with your dosa and idli batter. Okay. We soak your rice and lentil and all the other dals overnight. Okay. And when we place it in the grinder, we place it with a little bit of water, correct? So this water is there to facilitate more effective grinding, so that all your particles are ground to the same level and it is more smooth. Now, why did we not follow the other process of grinding? Why did we not simply powder all the, your rice and lentils and the dal in a mixie and simply mix the water with the powder to form the paste in the end? Okay, you might as well have arrived at the same paste in the end. Okay, but we follow this, wet grinding process because it's easier and you get a more even texture and the particle sizes are very uniform throughout. Whereas if you do a dry process, that cannot be ensured. Okay, so I think it was a bit of a lame example, but remember this when you're writing the answer. So if someone asks you, is wet process better or dry process better? Wet process is always better. Okay, but again, the final call that you need to take will depend on the type of rock you have. If you have something that's very hard, doing a wet process might not really be effective at all. Okay, so before I start explaining the process, I found a video a little while ago. I'll try and play that. And then once you have the video in your mind, when I'm explaining the process, it'll be easier for you guys to understand. Okay, give me 1 second. Can you guys see the screen?
Many people confuse.
Can you guys see the screen?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And the audio?
Yes, sir.
Use the terms cement and concrete. Cement is a fine gray powder that's used to make concrete. It's also an ingredient in the mortar that masons use to lay brick and stone. Cement also goes into soil cement, a material that's used in paving roads, building dams, and lining reservoirs. The action begins at the limestone quarry. The limestone near the surface has a high content of the minerals silica, iron, and aluminum oxide. Deeper down, the limestone is more pure, containing less of those minerals and more calcium carbonate. The plant uses both types of rock, altering the proportions to make different types of cement. Workers drill holes in the rock wall in which they plant powerful explosives. For safety, the workers have to position themselves behind the area they're blasting, maintaining a distance of at least 50 meters. After the explosion, loaders move in. They transfer the limestone rocks to 50-ton capacity dump trucks. The trucks then haul their cargo to the cement plant nearby. At the plant, the trucks dump the rocks into what's called the primary crusher. The rocks can be as big as a piano. The primary crusher reduces them to about the size of softballs. There's a constant spray of water to keep the dust from billowing up and settling on the chutes. From there, a conveyor transports the rocks to the secondary crusher. It reduces them further to about the size of golf balls. Rock high in calcium carbonate and rock low in calcium carbonate are crushed separately. Now it's time to mix the two. The ratio varies according to the type of cement they're making. This overhead machine called a tripper makes piles of the required proportions. They call this the raw mix. Then a reclaimer loads the raw mix into a grinding machine called a roller mill. Depending on what minerals are already naturally in the crushed rock, the factory adds extra minerals such as silica and iron. Certain types of cement also require aluminum oxide. The roller mixes and grinds the ingredients uniformly, producing a dry rock powder called the raw meal. Now the powder goes into a preheater. The temperature of the powder is 80 degrees Celsius upon entering. Within 40 seconds, it gets more than 10 times hotter. This begins the process of bonding the minerals together so that they'll later harden when hydrated with water. The preheater is equipped with what's called a flash calciner. In about 5 seconds, it removes 95% of the carbon dioxide in the powder through a chemical reaction. This isolates the lime, which is the most important element in cement. From there, the powder moves into a rotary kiln, a huge cylindrical furnace. It's set at an angle so that the powder moves from top to bottom a distance of 49 meters. The kiln rotates about 2 turns a minute to ensure the material travels through at the right speed. The burner's gas flame at the bottom reaches a scorching 16 to 1700 degrees Celsius. As the powder approaching it reaches the 1500 degree mark, it fuses into pieces about the size of marbles. These pieces are called clinker. As the clinker leaves the kiln, large fans cool it down to between 60 and 80 degrees Celsius. It's important to cool the clinker quickly in order to have quality cement. From here, the clinker goes to the storage area. The last stage of cement making is called finish grinding. They add some gypsum to the clinker. The precise amount varies with the type of cement they're making. Gypsum delays the cement's setting time so that it can be worked for up to 2 hours before hardening. The cement mills are called ball mills because they contain metal balls, about 150 tons of them in the largest mill. As the mill rotates, the balls crush and grind the clinker and gypsum into a fine powder.
Okay. So quick question now. That video that you guys saw, do you think it is of a wet process or a dry process?
Sir, a wet process.
Anyone else? Yeah, it is dry process. As in the initial water spraying that was done, it was just to prevent the dust from, flying around. Okay. You did not really, make a slurry or paste and then grind it. The entire grinding process and the powdering process happened entirely in a dry manner. Okay. So that was actually a dry process. So what I'll do is I'll explain wet and dry process with the help of, a schematic figure. Yeah, I'll finish this and I'll come back to this flowchart later. Okay. So in a dry process, what happens? Can you guys see the image clearly?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so first you have your, you have your quarry from where your calcareous and argillaceous rocks are, what do you call them, mined or quarried, and they put it into the drum trucks. It is taken to the cement manufacturing factory. Okay, Here, initially they're powdered to a whatever size that can be handled. They are stored, and then in whatever proportion you want, you feed them into the feeder bins. Okay. So in the feeder bin, what happens? Again, here if you see two rocks, one is, let's say it's for calcareous and the other is for argillaceous. It is mixed in whatever proportion we want. It is sent to the raw mill. Okay. In the raw mill, it is powdered to whatever design particle size is needed. Okay. And then it is sent to a hopper. From the hopper to the your raw mix that she said described in the video. From here, it goes on to the rotary kiln. Okay, this rotary kiln is inclined at an angle. Okay, so you feed the material here, you burn the material from here, and eventually by the end of this, by the time it reaches from the right end to the left end, you would have gotten these clinkers formed here. Okay, so if you see this is where the clinkers come out, and these clinkers are rapidly cooled. Like she said, the clinkers are normally size of marble ball. Okay, now one more thing you need to notice here is at the other end of the kiln, you also have something going to the electrostatic precipitator, and there is some emission that's going out outside. Okay, does anyone know what purpose the electrostatic precipitator serves? I think you guys must have studied about electrostatic precipitator before. Yes or no? Anyone? No one? Okay, so like I told in the previous class, remember to manufacture 1 ton of cement, about 1 ton of carbon dioxide is emitted, correct? So along with carbon dioxide, you also might have other harmful gases that is released. So you need to sort of filter out this emission that's coming out before releasing it out to the atmosphere or whatever. So your electrostatic precipitator sort of works there. Okay. So next, once you get your clinkers here, it is further taken down. Okay, and then it is cooled, powdered, and then it is sent to the cement mill, and it is powdered further, and it is used for whatever purpose you want. It is either sent to an RMC plant, or it is used in a site with a side drum mixer, or it is packed and shipped to wherever it is required. So at no stage is there water getting involved. Okay, so it's dry material more or less. Okay, and this region, the kiln that is there, it actually has 3 regions. I think I might have a slide. Yeah, I'll talk about the 3 regions in the next slide. Okay. Now to quickly compare this with the wet process, see what happens. So quarry again. So in the quarry, you have your raw materials. Take it out. You get your rocks. Here, along with the rocks, you add water. Okay, and this grinding that is happening is of a slurry. Okay, so at this stage in the previous case, you simply ground the dry rocks. There was no water involved. Here, it is happening in a slurry form. And then you have, and then the rest of the process is more or less same. Okay, you take it here and then you send it to the kiln. The only difference is, can you tell me in terms of energy consumption, is more energy consumed here or less energy consumed here?
More energy.
Why?
Sir, it requires the water to be heated, no, sir?
Exactly. Okay, so in the previous case, your material was dry. Okay, there was no need to remove the water content from the, the final product itself. Here, what happens? Your slurry, once it enters the kiln, there is about 38 to 40% water that is there. Okay, and this entire amount of water that is there needs to be eliminated. So to evaporate and eliminate this water, you obviously need more heat. Okay, in sense, more energy that is required to convert this slurry into the clinker, like in the previous case. Okay, so that is one problem with your wet process, more energy consumption. But again, overall, talking about the quality of product that is formed at the end of wet process, it is definitely better than your dry process. Okay, and the last 5 steps are exactly the same. Once the clinkers are got, you add your gypsum and whatever else you want. In case of colored concrete, we also add something called as pigments, okay, along with the gypsum at that stage. So add your additives, grind it, store it, pack it, ship it to wherever you want. Okay. So your difference for your wet process and dry process is only here. Okay, in the first few processes. So instead of dry grinding, you make it a slurry and grind the slurry. Clear? So this is a flowchart that sort of depicts both. So here again, if you see this calcareous and argillaceous materials, only this process will vary. Okay, if it's a wet process or dry process. Beyond this, everything is same again. So maybe you can remember this one flow chart. Depending on what question comes to the test, you can eliminate either this arm or this arm and keep the rest of it same. Clear? So that is all. That is how cement is manufactured. The only key thing is you need to remember this addition of gypsum, and this gypsum is added only in the last stage. Okay, so you don't want gypsum to chemically take part at the fusion reactions place. So in the kiln, what happens at the temperature of about 1500 degrees Celsius, solid state fusion happens. Solid state fusion as in things fuse at atomic level. Okay. So, and they form all those Box compounds that we saw. We don't want gypsum to be a part of those Box compounds chemically. We want it to be present there. I'll show you how the chemical equation works in a while. Okay. So that is all. Has everyone understood dry process and wet process? Fairly simple.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so next, this is the schematic representation of the later half of your thing. So once you've got your slurry, you send it to the kiln. Okay, so this is your kiln. From you feed your material here, your fuel and heat is supplied from the side, and this thing is rotating, like she said, at around 2 rotations per minute. Okay, and this is inclined. Why is it inclined? Because if it is flat, not inclined, the material won't reach from this end to this end. You'll again have to apply, physical force to move materials. Instead, if it is inclined and it is rotating, at a constant speed, things will move from this end to this end automatically. Okay, so you get clinker, you cool it with air, you get those marble size, clinkers, and then you further grind it using that ball mill that she spoke about, add gypsum, send to packing. Now, this is important. Okay. So your kiln has 3 regions. So they're basically divided into drying zone, calcination zone, and clinkering zone. And look at the temperature difference between the 3 zones. So like I said, your heat is always supplied from this end, correct? So it will be hottest closer to wherever your heat and energy is supplied, and relatively less hot at the other end. So your slurry in case of wet process and your just dry powdered material in case of your dry process is entered at this stage. At this stage, all the water that is there in the mixture needs to be removed. Okay. So what is the vaporization point of water? It's about 100 degrees Celsius, correct? So at about 400 degrees Celsius, it is completely ensured that all the water that is there in the matrix is gone. So beyond this, come to a calcination zone. What is calcination? What is a synonym for calcination? What is calcination basically?
Reaction occurs in the
Correct, but it's simply burning. Okay. So what happens here? The temperature is between say 650 to 1000 degrees Celsius. Here your calcium oxide, what was the calcium carbonate disintegrates into your lime, that is calcium oxide and carbon dioxide. So that 1 ton of carbon dioxide that I was explaining that is released, it is at this stage. Okay. Now come to the last part. This is where all the fusion reaction or that solid state fusion takes place to form the various Box compounds. Okay. So that is all. So if someone said with the help of a schematic sketch, explain the different regions of a kiln that is used in manufacturing of cement, just draw simple sketch like this, divide it into 3 parts, make sure it is inclined. Drying, calcination, clinkering. Drying, water is eliminated. Calcination, your calcium carbonate disintegrates into calcium oxide, which is a lime, and your carbon dioxide. And in a clinkering zone, all the Box compounds is formed. Okay. Now to quickly differentiate between dry process and wet process, dry process is used when the raw materials is hard. Okay. Wet process is for relatively softer materials. You cannot use wet for very hard materials also. Just remember that. Okay. So fuel consumption, dry process is low, wet process is high. We just learned why, because you need more energy to evaporate all the water that is there. Okay. Time of the process, it is lesser in duration. Wet process will take more duration. Quality of the product that is formed in the end, dry process of inferior quality. Wet process is of superior quality. Cost of production is high here. Cost of production is low here. Overall cost, this is costly, this is cheap. And physical state, the way things function, here it is in raw, dry, powdered form. Here it is in slurry form. Okay. So again, if, like I said, if we had to choose one process, go with wet process. Unless the material hardness is very high. Okay, maybe you can develop a method that is, partly dry and partly wet. Maybe you can bring down the particle size to a certain particle size using dry process, and then adopt wet process if you don't want to compromise on the final quality of the product. Okay, so that is as far as your manufacture of cement is concerned. Next, we'll get into the chemistry that happens in the clinkering zone. Okay. So in the calcination zone, like I said, your calcium carbonate disintegrates into what? Your calcium oxide and your carbon dioxide. Okay. Beyond this, we know that lime is there in your raw material, and we also said there are silica, alumina, and your iron oxides. So that will be your secondary materials here. So lime is fixed. Lime, silica, lime, alumina, and your iron oxide. Keep it ready. Next, this is the process of formation of C2S. What is C2S? Dicalcium silicate, like we described. So these four things are your Box compounds. Okay. Now, notice here, these are all chemically stable compounds. Okay. Gypsum is nowhere in picture here. Okay. I'll tell you at what stage gypsum comes and how it is a part of this entire thing. So calcium oxide reacts with silica dioxide to give dicalcium silicate. Similarly, tricalcium silicate, tricalcium aluminate, and tetracalcium aluminoferrate. Now you might ask me, sir, why do we have four different types of things? Was one of these not enough to hydrate and give concrete strength? So each of these four compounds has a specific purpose. Okay. It can be related to early strength. It can be related to late strength. It can be related to heat of hydration. Okay. So we learn how each of these four Box compounds affect the overall behavior of cement and how they hydrate and what the end result is. For now, just remember four Box compounds: C2S, C3S, C3A, C4AF. Okay. Next. So this is where your gypsum comes into picture. So gypsum is basically a calcium sulfate, okay, hydrated calcium sulfate to be more specific. So it is CaSO4.7H2O. Now, if you look at this number here, it says X, okay. So whenever we say X, what does that mean? Meaning we don't know what we can't quantify the amount of this calcium sulfate that is going to take part in this equation. And again, if you look at the final end product here, it is not chemically taking part with the other compounds that is there here. Okay, you still have this CaSO4.7H2O as it is. So it is just tricalcium sulfoaluminate hydrate that is there. So this thing is not, how do I say this? It's not chemically reacted with the other Box compounds. It is present just so that it can delay the setting time. That is all. That is why we don't add it in the rotary kiln itself. We add it at the grinding stage of the clinkers. Okay. So if someone asks you why is gypsum not added in the rotary kiln, why is it added in the final stages, you need to be able to justify the reason. Okay. So you'll have to remember this equation as well. So this is tricalcium sulfoaluminate hydrate because of this 7H2O. Clear? Yeah. So I want to define two terms here. Okay, there's something called as setting of cement and there's something called as hardening of cement. So setting basically only deals with the ability of your cement paste to retain its plastic state or to lose its plastic state. Do you guys know the difference between elastic, plastic? What is elastic?
The ability to retain being deformed.
To be more specific, it is the ability to regain its original shape after it is deformed. Okay. So you take an object, you apply some load on it, pull it, push it, do whatever you want. It might expand, deform, whatever. But once the load is removed, it will come back to its original position. That is your what? Elastic. But what is plastic?
Sir, it does not regain its position.
Correct.
Original one.
It can still deform, meaning you can apply some force on it, it will deform. But once you remove the force, it will not necessarily come back to its original position. Okay. Now, what is the other type of material other than your elastic and plastic? Which does not deform at all. What is it called?
Rigid.
Correct. You must have studied the entire first year. Whatever you studied is basically rigid, rigid body mechanics. Okay. So here, can you guys give me an example for an elastic material?
Rubber band.
Rubber band. Okay, that's good. What about plastic?
Clay.
Clay. Clay, correct. Clay, plaster of Paris, anything. Okay. So your cement is plastic when it is what? When it is wet, meaning when it is not, when you've still just mixed it. Okay. So there are two terms here. There's something called as initial set and there's something called as final set. So initial setting is basically that point of time at which your cement paste starts to lose its plasticity. Okay, and your final set is basically a stage where it is completely lost its plasticity. Understood? So setting has only to do with plasticity. It has nothing to do with its ability to take strength. Even when it is finally set, if you apply load on it, it might not be able to take load. Okay, it would have completely lost its plasticity and just started to harden. Okay, we have experiments for this. I'll explain that in the next class. So now just remember, this is setting. Okay, setting has nothing to do with what? Ability to take load. It has only to do with plasticity. Okay, initial set is when it starts to lose its plasticity. Final set is when it has completely lost its plasticity. Remember that. The second thing that might seem similar to setting, but it's not, is hardening. Okay, hardening is if I go stand on it, will it resist my load? Okay, if I apply a load on it, will it deform? Okay, that is hardening. So you want concrete to be hardened. So at a later stage also, this might cause a confusion to you guys. There's something called as rapid hardening cement. There's something called as quick setting cement. Okay, I don't know, the outright, if you don't know the basics of it, both of them might seem exactly identical, or you might think that they serve the same purpose, but they don't. Okay, when we say rapid hardening, I want it to harden and be able to take the load quickly. Whereas quick setting, I want it to set, fast, but I don't necessarily want to apply load on it as soon as it's set. Okay, just remember these 2 points. We'll delve into this with the help of experiments at a later stage. Just keep this in your mind now. Okay. Yeah. Next. So in concrete technology, we have landmark or benchmark days. We call it the first day, third day, 7th day, 15th day, and the 28th day. So this 28, that number that we have, is we're very fond of. So I think every experiment or every definition that we make this point forward will be, say, 28 days strength. Okay, so 28 day, we assume it's also been scientifically and theoretically proved that at the 20th day, about 99.6% of hydration of cement is completed. Okay, so the cement hydration that happens is a continuous process. You can't expect it to set and harden and attain strength in one day. So at the end of 28 day, how much? 99.6%. That percentage can vary from textbook to textbook. It is, let's say, it is above 99%. Okay, of strength is attained. So everything that we do is 28. So that is why if you've seen all these contractors and builders, they talk about slab cycle. Does anyone know what a slab cycle is? A slab cycle is basically the time duration between the molding, or what, I should also explain what molding is now. It's basically the process of pouring concrete for a slab level or a roof level. Okay, so the time period between construction of one slab level and the other slab level is typically 1 month. Okay, Why is this 1 month? Why do we not do it before? This is the reason. Because we need 28 days to achieve that strength. If you construct a story above your story, before the below story has attained strength, what will happen? Your thing will crumble and fall. So this 28-day round, they just simply round it off to 1 month, and they tell 1 month slab cycle. So that is why any high-rise building, if you see, the typical time span between construction of one floor and the construction of another floor will be more or less 1 month, not less than that. Okay. And we also have to talk about things like curing and all that. If you've seen all these buildings, we pour water on it and put gunny bags and pour water. Okay. All these are things to ensure hydration happens properly. We'll deal with all this at a later point. For now, remember significant days: 1, 3, 7, 15, 28. Okay. So if you look at this, as soon as cement and water is mixed, in the first day, your tricalcium aluminate and tetracalcium, oh, I missed the A there, it's C4AF. Okay. Tricalcium aluminate and tetracalcium aluminoferrate start hydration. Okay. And in the next 7 days, your tricalcium silicate would start reacting and gaining strength. And your C2S and C3S will keep continuing till the 20th day. I think I have a graph for this. Okay. So if you look at this graph, look at the time in days. Okay, so your x-axis is time in days, and your y-axis is your rate of strength gained or your compressive strength that is attained. So C2S and C3S, it is a continuous process. Okay, whereas for your C3 and C4AF, the initial reaction takes place in a few days, and the final strength is attained in a matter of few days itself. You don't really, it does not keep increasing over a period of time. Okay, so if you want a type of cement in which you want high early strength, okay, you don't want the strength to be attained after 28 days, but if you want to say within 14 days or whatever, you need to decrease the percentage of your C3S, C2S and increase the percentage of C3A and C4AF. Okay, so you need to play around with the composition of box compounds to arrive at all these different types of cements that I was talking about, your rapid hardening, quick setting, and all that. Okay, just remember that. Now next I have to define two terms. Okay, there's something called as this tobermonite. Okay, make a note of this. Tobermonite is also called as CSH gel. CSH stands for calcium silicate hydrate. Okay, so whatever concrete you see, the ability of this concrete to withstand load, give strength is all because of CSH gel. Okay, calcium silicate hydrate. Without calcium silicate hydrate gel, there would be, no world or no infrastructure as we know today. So what is CSH? So at the end of every reaction of every box compounds, you'll notice that one common compound is formed. See, you have calcium silicate hydrate, you have calcium silicate hydrate, you have calcium silicate hydrate. So it is important. Your strength that is attained is because of the CSH gel. And more or less, the secondary byproduct of almost all reactions is calcium hydroxide. Can you see calcium hydroxide? So you have COH, 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 COH everywhere. So this COH is a secondary byproduct. It does not necessarily impart any strength to concrete. So researchers these days, what they have done to make you utilize this COH twice, we've discovered something called as secondary cementitious materials, or supplementary cementitious materials. Things like fly ash and silica fume, that ground granulated blast furnace slag that I was talking about in the previous class. All these materials, they react with this, additional calcium hydroxide that is present in this equation and gives additional CSH gel. Okay, so that we'll discuss. For now, just remember products of hydration, primary products of hydration, two things: calcium silicate hydrate, CSH gel, which is also called as tobermonite gel, and calcium hydroxide, two fundamental products of hydration. Okay, and the strength that is attained in concrete is only because of CSH gel. We'll get into the microstructure in the next class. We're running out of time. This one point I'll mention. So this hydration of cement is an exothermic process. Okay, so when I say exothermic, when it reacts, heat is evolved or heat is emitted or whatever. Now look at the heat of hydration in terms of kilojoule per kg that is released. It is the highest for your tricalcium aluminate, and the second highest for your tricalcium silicate, and then for your tetracalcium aluminoferrate, and then your dicalcium silicate. So what happens in these mass concreting structures? You know what mass concreting is? Where there is huge volume of concrete that is poured at once. So think of things like a dam. Okay, it is huge, it is wide, it is deep, and you have to pour all the concrete at once. So what happens is, if you have a cement with high content of C3A in it, okay, there's obviously more heat that is evolved, and in such a huge volume of concrete, more heat is evolved. So all the water that is there in the matrix is lost. It will start leading to shrinkage cracks. Okay, so again, advisable. If I have to use cement for a mass concreting structure, which Box compound should be present in higher proportion, which Box compound should be present in lower proportion? Just by looking at this table, you should be able to tell. C2S should be more because it gives low heat of hydration. C3A should be the least because it gives too much heat of hydration. Okay, so depending on these, proportion of the different Box compounds, there are different types of cements that are there in the industry. Okay, that thing we'll discuss in the next class. Types of cement. In fact, that is, I think, the next topic in your syllabus copy as well. Okay, so I think we've run out of time. There is about 2 minutes left.